Thank you very much, and welcome to U.S.-Turkey Relation Panel organized by SETA Foundation and Defense Technology and Engineering, one of the leading defense industry companies in Turkey. Welcome again, and as you follow, Turkey and U.S. relations are passing through another critical juncture, and since especially 2008 has been one of the most challenging years in bilateral relations, for multiple different reasons. And starting with the President Trump's announcement of the withdrawal from Syria on December 19, the relations enter another significant critical juncture. And today we will discuss with our panelists the implications of this withdrawal and the future of U.S.-Turkey relations. The first panel would be a conversation with our two very distinguished panelists, Deputy Foreign Minister of Turkey, Sedat Önal, and General Coordinator of SETA Foundation, Burhanettin Duran. They will start their conversation. We start conversation with a short introductory remarks, 8 to 10 minutes. Following that, we will try to make it as interactive as possible. So I will try to collect as much question as I can in our limited time. We of course thank our Deputy Foreign Minister. Despite his very busy schedule, he basically accepted to be here with us. And now I will turn to the Deputy Foreign Minister for his introductory remarks. How was the meetings? Everybody is curious about the meetings that took place for the last 2 days between US and Turkey, especially in regards to Syria, withdrawal from Syria, safe zone, and other issues.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here with this audience. First, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Sedat Önal. I am Deputy Foreign Minister of Turkey. I am responsible for political issues with all parts of the world except the European Union. And before this position, I have taken over this position like 6 months ago. Before that, I was Deputy Undersecretary responsible for Middle East and North Africa. And I am head of delegation of Turkish delegation to Astana. I have been in this position about 2 years now. When we talk about Turkish-American relations, we should, of course, first remind ourselves that these relations, as with any other country, are basically informed first and foremost by history, geography, and common values that we all believe in. This is also true in our relationship with America. And for us, this is a time-tested, important relationship. This is a strategic alliance. It has its institutional dimension, our cooperation and solidarity within NATO context, our cooperation and solidarity in Korean War, and throughout the Cold War years, Turkey was an important, staunch ally on the southern east frontier of the NATO, and as an important bulwark counterbalancing then the Soviet Union. The end of the Cold War is something that we should in mind as one of the important milestones that defines not only relationship between our two countries, but overall, because after the Cold War, in the post-Cold War era, relationships between countries started to be defined not by the restraints of Cold War years, but with something else, with greater room for interaction between different actors that were in the past in either camp. And Turkey as a country who is located in a very difficult geography, does not, and having this as part of its identity, having the roots all the way to Central Asia, and the geographic location has not the luxury of having one-dimensional foreign policy or relationship. For us, we think that we are part of Europe, but at the same time, we are part of Middle East, we are part of Caucasia, we are part of Balkans. This is not only rhetoric, but something rooted in history. And the end of the Cold War has provided us a potential to use these dormant dimensions of our own identity as a country, as a nation. But at the same time, after the Cold War, we have also seen challenges emerging, and especially in the Middle East. And then again, this has become another important area where our cooperation with America mattered, and it matters still. And to cut it short, I just would like to make a few references to recent history, the period which we called Arab Spring. When Arab Spring came, again, it was first met with some hesitation in the beginning because nobody realized what has really been happening. But after some hesitation, the general feeling was that these popular movements were genuine ones, as they are the aspirations of the people for greater freedoms, for addressing inequality, for lack of opportunity, things like this, greater democracy. So, like with other countries, like with America, we also decided to support these peaceful movements for change. And again, our cooperation with America was very important then. But for reasons that I don't want to go into detail, at the end, these movements did not reach their objectives to a large extent. And they were, in certain countries, they got stuck. In some, they were reversed. And now we have faced a new regional strategic environment in which considerations of security and preservation of status quo is now higher than any other consideration. But at the same time, we should also bear in mind that the reasons that caused these popular movements remain unanswered. So they are going to come over time. We somehow need to find ways and means of addressing them. One important lacking element seems to be the lack of institutions, because people express themselves, their desires for change, but it seems that none of those countries, there were institutions that would help facilitate this peaceful transitionary change, among other factors as well. For Turkey, when we reached this current status quo, two countries are especially important because we are neighboring them, because they are kind of broken countries. One is Syria, one is Iraq. And when the popular movements were not able to reach their political ends, sometimes because of lack of support by the international community, sometimes the rhetoric, forceful rhetoric, was not matched with enforced action. For this or that reason, now we have reached a point when we need to find other ways of stabilization to addressing these crises. For Turkey, since we have a long border with these countries, this has over time also evolved into some kind of national security threat. And when the aspirations of these people were left unanswered, and over time there was a lack of a void and a vacuum of power, first in Iraq, then in Syria, we also see the emergence of terrorism in the form of Daesh. And the international effort evolved into combating terrorism, and it has become the primary objective for the international community. As you saw yesterday, there was this counter-Daesh coalition meeting in which about 74 countries participated. And this is about fight against Daesh in both Syria and Iraq. But as I explained already, when we go back its root causes, the situation was completely something else. We should bear this in mind while we try to obliterate, defeat terrorism, because the way we do it is going to be decisive. And while trying to do so, we should bear in mind its root causes. The way we address it should not create new causes of marginalization, instability, and other factors. So this is something very, very important. In our relationship, at the point we stand with America, especially on the Syrian context, the problem is now overall we are on the same page in our understanding of what kind of solution is needed for Syrian crisis. We both believe that it should be a credible political change as defined by UN Security Council Resolution 2254. Actually, we have a roadmap defined in this resolution, but interpretation and application of this resolution is key. And this is what we are trying to do. On the other hand, we need to calm down the situation on the ground, and we need to achieve nationwide ceasefire, upon which we can build the political process and at the end of the day find a political solution. But while trying to combat Daesh terrorism and calm down the situation, the choices that America made in terms of partners is something that we disagree with, because this partner is PYD-YPG, which is an extension of PKK, that is a separatist terrorist organization that was the reason of killing of thousands of people in Turkey and remains an existential national security threat for Turkey. But still, we have important relationship, cooperation, and we are trying to address this misunderstanding, this disagreement in an effective manner that is not going to affect our cooperation in a negative manner nor our bilateral relationship. That's why we came up with certain mechanisms of dialogue with America. And one of them is working groups on different topics One of them is on Syria. On Syria, we have been actually meeting for some time now. Within Syria Working Group, we were able to agree on a roadmap on Manbij. It basically includes as a departure point for America disengagement, a model for disengagement from PYD, YPG. And we have achieved some progress, and we are still working on this model. If we can finalize it as we both are trying to do now, we think it is also going to provide an important example for how we cooperate on east of the Euphrates. So one another important thing is the decision of President Trump to withdraw from Syria, and we are also now talking with our American colleagues, partners, on how to coordinate it in such a way that there is not going to be a power vacuum that can be exploited by terrorists. So this is where we stand. I would like to stop here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And from your introduction, I understanding that you opened the Pandora's box for so many questions on different issues, and we will come to the details of different issues, including safe zone, Manbij roadmap, and the Astana process in the question and answers. And now, Professor Duran, I want you to draw a larger picture about the risk and opportunities for US and Turkey in the Middle East. What are the areas that they can cooperate? What are the areas that they may not able to cooperate, but they may need to contain potential crisis in the future?
Thank you, Kilic. I'm very happy to have such a speech in this distinguished audience. Well, I should start by underlining the fact that since 2013, the tensions between Turkey and the US are increasing. This is simply related to not just bilateral relations, but at the same time to the differing perceptions of Middle East policies. You would remember that in the May 2013, the meeting between President Erdogan and President Obama did not produce a solution to Syria crisis. And from that time, I believe that two countries' Syria perspectives are not going on the same page. Yes, there were many times to settle this difference, but even including in the Trump era, for example, on operation against Daesh in Raqqa, unfortunately did not produce a positive development to make two countries' Syria policy closer. But now we have an opportunity in this Syrian in the U.S. Syrian withdrawal. I believe that there can be an opportunity for two countries to restore bilateral relations, to restore trust between two allies. I know we are not in the days of model partnership, as Obama mentioned before 2013. Or sometimes we are using strategic partnership. Yes, both sides are accepting this, but the realities on the ground are not meeting the definition of such a strategic partnership. So it means that Turkey and the US have to redefine their relationship into a new future, of course, for more cooperation and more positive bilateral relations, starting from the Syrian crisis. Why do I mention Syria crisis so important? Because of its central place in Turkey's even domestic turbulence. Since 2013, Turkey is experiencing some regional and domestic turbulences. This is this is the first point that I want to make. And the second one is the changing relationship and the changing environment in the region and in the international system in general. We are not in the days of Arab Spring. We are in the days of the discussions of the end of liberal world order. We are in the days of the reality that US is discussing its future role as superpower and US responsibilities towards maintaining the world order. President Trump is even discussing the feasibility, significance of NATO alliance. And some withdrawals regarding the Middle East is on the agenda. Not just Syria, but also Afghanistan, maybe in the near future, Iraq would be on the agenda. So at that time of US withdrawals from the Middle East, and we are far away from the Arab Spring optimism, we have learned enough that there is a turbulence, there is a proxy wars, regional rivalries, and some selective US involvement in the region. And this involvement is becoming more and more selective and far away from keeping the order in the Middle East. These are the new realities. US focus is continuing to move towards Pacific and China. So in the new realities of the Middle East, these two allies have to find some ground for working together in the region. Of course, given the realities of the changed strategic calculations on both sides. So this discussion is not just about the shift of axis or ideological preferences for Turkey and the US. It is about the way how to find common ground for your interests and for your future evaluations in the Middle East or regarding the general international system. But still, there is a common ground for making mutual interests fulfilled in the region. Of course, this means that US withdrawal from Syria should be accomplished to meet Turkey's security interests and US considerations in the region. And I believe that two sides have very successful diplomats, as we have our Deputy Foreign Minister Sedat Önal here. They will discuss all of the issues, details, and plans, how to make it an opportunity for reviving, for restoring Turkey and US relations in the Middle East in general. This is the first, actually this is the testing case for two sides to have, again, common interest fulfilled, mutual interest fulfilled by making a solution to this Syrian affair. Personally, I think that US should be on the table of Syria solution. Withdrawal from Syria doesn't mean that US and Europeans should be out of this equilibrium. Simply because all of the issues regarding refugees and terrorism are a matter of concern for Europe first, maybe to a lesser extent for the US. But there are other issues to be involved in this affair. Of course, Iranian domination in the future of the Middle East, or Russian increasing influence again in the region. And more important than that, any potential environment which is ripe for terrorism and proxies that might pose threat to all countries in the world, including the US, should be considered very carefully. I'm not just mentioning the Daesh, President Trump is ready to declare a victory over Daesh, but still we believe that there are enough suitable environment for the emergence of new terrorist groups or re-emergence of terrorist groups like Daesh. So the problems in the field are there. They are not solved. Leaving them in the field is not a solution to the problems of the region. And of course, Turkey has to face it. We don't have the luxury of leaving Syria now as the US is doing. We have to face the realities in the field, including the YPG terrorist organization, which is armed by the US, our natural ally. All of these are sad realities, but you have to make a solution to these problems, and you have to find a way for common interests. Well, if you look at from this perspective, I think that Turkey and US should start to make a solution, make a plan for Manbij, and then extend to this east of the Euphrates, and then this could be an opportunity to restore our relations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I have a couple of questions, but why don't I collect some questions if you already have that, and then I will give up this privilege this time. Yes, let's start with the gentleman over here.
I'm Peter Humphrey, Intel analyst and a former diplomat. Ambassador, we were astonished when Turkey decided to side with Maduro. Can you help me understand what's going on there?
Okay, let me get the gentleman over here as well, and then the gentleman over here. Please identify yourself and very short.
Yes, hello. Thanks very much for your talk. I'm Shlomo Bolz with the Syrian American Council. I had a question. Both of you, I noticed in your speech, seem to be putting a lot of emphasis on Manbij, the potential for a deal in Manbij to be a model that extends elsewhere. But as we know, the deal in Manbij is not necessarily going so well. The timeline was supposed to be 3 months. It's been extended much longer. President Erdogan expressed his frustration regarding Manbij just last week. So has there been a change for the better recently? And if not, how is this a model for success rather than failure, as it seems to have been so far?
Thank you very much. And let me have the gentleman over there.
Actually,
Okay. Okay. Let's get one more, and then we will start.
Good morning, Minister. My name is Mikhail Turgiev. I am from the Russian news agency RIA Novosti. So my question is, yesterday, Minister Çavuşoğlu said that there are some countries who finance terrorists in Idlib, and it is a hamper for cleaning the territory. So my question is, can you name those countries, and what evidence do you have? And the second is, do you think that operation with Russia in Idlib is possible? And if yes, well, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Shall we start with you, Mr. Deputy?
Of course. On Maduro, our position is one of principle, because for our own political experience, we are against change of elected governments through other means than the ballot box. This is as clear as that. And we have recently lived through this coup attempt. The entire society still has its traumatic effects. We have never seen in our own region any positive outcome by outside interference to domestic processes, and we want this issue to be solved through dialogue between the actors inside the country. And what we think we can do is facilitate this dialogue and to have them their own way to resolve their differences within the context of their own political system. This is our position. As to Manbij timeline, yes, we are behind it. It has its own difficulties, but I can say that we have achieved some progress, and we hope that this is going to be accelerated. We already have.
Is there a specific timeline now? Acceleration means 3 months, 6 months, or anything set yet?
You know, it's not always helpful to put timelines, but by the decision of President Trump to withdraw, it's their own timeline. Mm-hmm. So we now live in a different context. So Manbij has become all the more relevant. And the relevance is, let me also explain. As I said, basically it is about our agreement for disengagement from PYD. And now we are having joint patrols with the American side. And we are also working on joint vetting of local structures, local people who are going to give public services or going to administer these places until we will have a legitimate government in place in Damascus. This is our understanding. And if it works, it could also be applicable to east of Euphrates. This is what we are saying. And we are hopeful. We have achieved some progress, and we are working on it with our American colleagues. Idlib, some countries, I am not here to interpret what my minister might have said, but we see provocations, let me put it, provocations to disrupt the understanding and parameters of this de-escalation zone that we were put in place with Russia, Iran, in Idlib. Idlib is not an easy case because we also need to recognize that there are also radical elements inside this de-escalation zone, but the de-escalation zone is not for protecting these radicals. It is for protecting about 3 million civilians. And in spite of the presence of these radicals, they should not and could not be taken as a pretext for a large-scale attack that would end up with refugee flows in their millions or killing of hundreds of thousands of civilians, innocent people, or destruction of civilian infrastructure. This is what we are against. This is what we agree with the Russians and Iranians in Sochi Memorandum of Understanding, that we need to preserve this place. But we are also working with them to address this issue of radical terrorism at the same time.
Did the US withdrawal from Syria change the Memorandum of Understanding, or was it any revision about that?
No, we don't see that this is something related, because what we are trying to do has its integral approach from our side. We would like to stabilize the place in the interim period to facilitate local people to take their own affairs at their hands until the time during which time we will work with our partners, including America, for a political solution, political process. But when we have this end result, the political solution, then we hope we will have a legitimate government in Damascus, and every place will be under its control. This is what we aim at.
Thank you.
Well,
Manbij, you can
regarding
start with
this
Manbij.
Manbij question, yeah. Well, for Turkey, Syrian civil war is a black hole. Actually, as I tried to explain, this Syrian civil war made a huge impact on Turkish-US relations as well. So before making some analysis on how to protect YPG from Turkish attacks, it should be underlined that both sides should work on Syria, starting from Manbij. And this roadmap is useful for making this very positive step. For Turkish public opinion, this US involvement in protecting YPG is very serious. Maybe this is not properly understood by the American side. That's why I underline this coordination in Manbij as something very positive for bilateral relations. Yes, there can be some negotiations on how to accomplish it, but for Turkey's side, this is something promised. So this has to be done. This has to be accomplished. This has to be properly functioned to protect Turkey's security concerns as well. Well, US withdrawal from Syria leaves some questions. You know, what is the US plan, end game for Syria? What would be the future of Syrian refugees? What would be the future of some proxy non-state actors in the field? And what about the future of Assad regime? And all of these questions are not properly answered by the decision of withdrawal. So US should, I think US have such a chance to work with Turkey, at least to provide some answers to all of these unanswered questions. But the insistence on YPG, protecting YPG, and this is so much dominated in the Washington's explanations or discussions, is making possibility of working together difficult. So I believe that diplomats will create a plan that can work in the field. But Manbij is very significant for making this clear that US and Turkey will cooperate. So I know that diplomats may tie Manbij issue to the east of the Euphrates. But first starting from Manbij will make it more easy to have negotiations on the future of northern Syria. That's why Turkish President Erdogan is making so much emphasis on Manbij. Unfortunately, we have lost, as Turkey and the US, we have lost the possibility of working together in Syria. First, we should revive this, and Manbij is very significant from that point. Well, is it enough, I think?
Let me collect another set of questions. Gentleman over there.
Steve Winters, independent consultant. I read in the paper that just a few days ago, Secretary Pompeo made a statement that the U.S. would never allow Russia to become a dominant influence in the Mideast. But obviously, Russia is playing a big role in many ways. What are you having any discussions or suggestions to the Americans to perhaps decrease their worries about the effect of Russian influence?
Thank you. And lady over there.
Nisu Gören with the Turkish Coalition of America. My question is to Ambassador Önal. Turkey did not participate to the latest Department of State joint statement on Syria. What are Turkey's some of outstanding issues and conditions on the implementation of the UN Security Council Resolution 2254? Thank you.
Can you repeat your question? Which statement are we talking about? There's a
The joint statement from the Department of State that came out yesterday on Syria.
We are part of it.
And what are some...
We are also part of the coalition, so...
But Turkey was not named in the joint statement that came out yesterday.
No, we also
Maybe
have given our agreement. We are also
Okay.
part of the coalition.
Thank you for the clarification.
Gentleman over here and then Alan. This side.
Thank you, Alan Makovsky, Center for American Progress. What you had to say about Manbij, unfortunately, sounded like, what was said 6 months ago or longer, that there's a roadmap and it can be a model for what happens east of the Euphrates. And I just wonder, from periodically, President Erdogan has threatened to take military action unilaterally, and I just wonder what you think the prospect is that that would happen. Second of all, if I could, what's happened, as you said, the U.S. relationship with the YPG has created, probably from my lifetime, greater anger in U.S., maybe since the arms embargo anyway.
Are you going to share your age as well, Alan?
I'm sorry?
Are you going to share your age as well?
I don't know if it's immediately relevant, but you could probably take a look at me and unfortunately guess. I'm just wondering, look, when the U.S. started the relationship with the YPG, it was after asking Turkey to intervene in Kobani. Turkey said no. I'm not saying I'm not saying Turkey necessarily made a decision that was hard to understand, but that was what led the U.S. to, but in effect, stumble into a relationship with the YPG. When it happened, also, Turkey was talking to the PKK and had that very year hosted the PYD leader, and it had the previous year, helping to legitimize, I think, in many ways, the organization. I just wondered, to what extent do you think Turkey is culpable for having created this situation? Okay.
Gentleman.
Thank you.
Herbert Regenbogen. I'm a professor of international law and international relations. I'd like to turn to a bigger question about the reconstruction of Syria and how this can occur when enormous amounts of money is needed for reconstruction, when you have an alleged war criminal sitting at the table instead of being on the menu. What is Turkey's policy when it originally had broken relations with Syria because of the conduct of its leader? And today, what is its expectations?
May I?
Mr. Duran, can we start with that this time? Let's start with Russia.
Yes, about Russian role. In Syria, as you know, we work and cooperate with Russia. After especially Russian intervention in Syria militarily and their presence on the ground, they have become one of the key actors in Syria. And this is something that everybody should acknowledge. And Russia with us and with Iran on Astana platform, we came together on certain common denominators. sometimes it's not something easy to understand, this Astana platform. Because at the end of the day, Russia and Iran are supporters of the regime, whereas we support the opposition, which we see as the legitimate representative of aspirations of the Syrian people. And normally, you would not think that such platform will easily work. But it works because first, we all agree that there is, under current circumstances, there is no military solution to this crisis, first. Second, we all believe in protection of territorial integrity and political unity of Syria. This remains something very essential. If we cannot operate within these parameters, it can only destabilize the country and the region further. So these are very important things that we agree on. And in the new international relations and international situation we have found ourselves in, as a professor put it, there are new realities. You cannot just define yourself within a camp and seek very maximalist objectives. If you are for peace, security, and stability in a region or in the larger context, you need to work with partners with which you may not always agree on each and everything. So this is the exercise we have developed over the years, now 2 years, with Russia and with Iran. And actually, this platform served certain objectives. First, the situation on the ground calmed down. We, for like more than 2 years, we do not see killing of hundreds of people every day. It was a daily exercise, daily practice. Now, this is not the case. It was not 100% successful. I should also acknowledge this, because by definition, we do not agree on each and everything. But this is a way to put pressure and leverage on the regime to encourage them, sometimes force them to come to the negotiating table. Normally, it's not that easy because the regime is reluctant. They think they can have a military victory. But within this context, we are able to create energy and material with which we were able to re-energize what we call Geneva process, which is in line with UN parameters and this 2254 resolution of United Nations Security Council. So what we are doing is completely in line with the position of larger international community and our partners in the West, including America. So this is the context in which we see the functionality of Russia. We do not see them as a threat. Of course, every country has its own national interest considerations. But here, we are trying to stabilize the country and try to find a political solution at the soonest possible time.
There was another Manbij question, but you already mentioned most of it.
Manbij, I mentioned, about you talked about possible culpability of Turkey for what had happened. I understand. I will answer you.
I just wanted to make clear that I was addressing that. I should have.
To Burhanettin Duran, I know.
Yeah. Obviously, you can count.
Okay, then. So, okay. All right. I will go for easier questions then.
Reconstruction.
Reconstruction of Syria. It's again, we have this general position and rhetoric on the side of international community that since there is an illegitimate person or administration in place in Syria, this is not a good time to help with reconstruction, and that there should be a political solution or advancement of political process for international community to start supporting. This is good in principle, but we should also take this into consideration, the situation of the people on the ground and their needs, their daily needs. Maybe it may not be entirely called reconstruction, but for stabilization, we need to take steps. But I also agree that these are not completely different from the political process. There is and there should be a linkage between these two processes, but the sequence that we are seeking should not be something consecutive. It should be parallel processes encouraging each other, because there are people in need. You need to address these needs. They cannot wait for us to come up with a political solution. This is the reality on the ground. But on the other side, we are not, as Turkey, for doing things that is, at the end of the day, going to legitimize this regime, which is responsible for displacement of half of the entire population and killing of almost at least 500,000 of people. So we are very serious about it, but we should also, as I said, take into consideration the situation of the people on the ground.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hard question is yours.
Yes, think tankers are in a better position to answer hard questions rather than diplomats, Well, first, this Pompeo statement about Russian domination in the Middle East. Well, personally, sometimes I'm confused about the Trump administration's policy towards not just Russia, but also towards Iran. There are several statesmen that they are not happy with this, with the increasing influence of Russia in the Middle East. But in the reality, there are just economic sanctions against Russia. But in the region, some perceptions about covered division of labor between US and Russia is made. This perception is increasing, is growing. Because of the realities, since the Obama period, maybe since 2015, Syria is left to Russia. And all the capitals in the Middle East and the Gulf are trying to adopt this new reality. But what is the extent of allowing Russia to be influential in the Middle East is not certain. Yes, Obama maybe expected that Russia would be stuck in the Middle East, but it seems that Russia is handling with this problem in a wise way, in a very less costly way. So Obama's expectation was not fulfilled, and Russia is making some more gains by a little cost. So in the long run, what would be the U.S. strategy, U.S. policy towards Russian influence in the Middle East is not clear. Yes, in the national security documents, Russia is rival, Iran is enemy. But in reality, in the field, there is no clear signs that Iran will be limited enough in the future in the Middle East. And the same thing can be said for the Russian influence. Even strategically changing the U.S. responsibility towards the international system creates many vacuums for Russia, even putting some pressure on Europe. So I'm not sure about the impacts of such statements made by Pompeo. All the capitals in the Middle East are looking at the field, not to the statements. For this operation issue in Manbij, one thing is clear. Turkish public opinion waited enough for any possibility to work together with the U.S. in Manbij. And, 70,000 soldiers are in the borders, in the Syrian borders, Turkish soldiers. So, this operation was on the agenda. And when President Trump made this phone call stating that we are leaving Syria, and operations are waiting for this, to see what will happen. But there are some times for waiting this, but this is not endless. There are some patience, but still it's decreasing, not increasing. Anger towards YPG, well, yes, the threat coming from YPG issue for Turkey is so vital. Syria or YPG issue could be a minor one for US public opinion. Even the discussions, political discussions are not about Syria even. But for Turkey, this threat coming from the PKK branch or YPG is so vital that there has to be a settlement between Turkey and the US about this issue. And this should meet Turkey's security concerns. Yes, to what extent Turkey is responsible for the existing conditions? Well, one thing should be clear. Yes, to defeat ISIS, Daesh, the US used YPG, which is a branch of PKK. This was a mistake from the beginning. Turkey's, at that time, inaction or inability to fight with the Daesh could be criticized. I can say many things about that. But to choose a terrorist organization to fight ISIS created this problem from the beginning. And now US is leaving Syria, but there is an armed terrorist organization, a threat to Turkey, and we are allies, strategic allies. So you cannot explain all of the things in one package, in one sentence to anyone in Turkey. And sometimes people are criticizing Erdogan's statements about the US or YPG. But believe me that as Erdogan is successfully managing this public opinion because he is a strong leader and he can influence public opinion. But anyone, any politician, seeing this threat coming from YPG and the failure of two states in Iraq and Syria, this issue of threat perception is so critical and will continue to be critical in the next 5 or 10 years for Turkey. So US should consider all of these issues in relation to bilateral relations. Syria is something minor for US, I'm repeating myself, but for Turkey, it is very critical. Reconstruction of Syria, well, this is a huge issue, and without a political transition, we should not expect any real attempt of reconstruction. And it is needed a very huge money, and who will pay the price? I don't see any volunteer in that for that cost. But Astana process should be combined with the Geneva process, and then the political process. When political process is working, then this issue could be seriously discussed and created some solutions. Turkey is not, of course, supporting legitimization of this Assad regime, But at the same time, you have to face the reality. Turkey is working with Russia and Iran for a solution to Syria. Turkey knows that if Assad is in power, refugees will not go back. And you cannot a peaceful Syria, a stable Syria in the future. But at the same time, Assad is gaining more and more power. So solutions could be accomplished within realities. And that's why I said US should give a positive contribution to this process, even US is leaving Syria. But realities on the ground is more powerful than in the minds that are in the minds.
Thank you very much. I know that there are some other questions, but I have to finish it. But before finishing the panel, I have one question, and I want a short answer from the panelists. Mr. Önal, I like a quote from once she was the Assistant Secretary of State, and when she defined Victor Nuland, the state of US-Turkey relations in Syria, she said there is a strategic convergence, but there is a tactical divergence on the ground. So if you want to define the relationship right now, how would you characterize it? Where are we right now?
Well, on our part, we can say that we are working very hard to minimize the divergences and maximize the convergences. This is what we are doing. I hope we can make it, because this is going to be a very important contribution to the resolution of this conflict and crisis in Syria.
Professor Duran, another question for you. What will be, and again, short answer for this, what will be the best case scenario and worst case scenario for US-Turkey cooperation in Syria? I know it's a long question, but...
Yes, you're asking hard questions to me. It's not fair. Yes, worst scenario is the continuation of US protection for YPG. Somehow less worst scenario is US withdrawal suddenly without any deal with Turkey. The best scenario is, of course, cooperation with Turkey and US in northern Syria and US involvement in the political process for the future of Syria, working together. And even this, as I said several times, this could be an opportunity to restore bilateral relations. And of course, I strongly support the best scenario.
Okay. Thank you very much. Please join me in celebrating the panelists. And at 12:30, we will have another panel on defense cooperation between Turkey and United States. Please join me. Thank you.